it's 12:30, so let's go ahead and begin. The famous poet Langston Hughes once asked the question, what happens to a dream deferred? The poem was rhetorical, so he did not give us an answer. But we all know to defer something is to put it off to a later date. I believe we are the recipients of the dreams, desires, aspirations of our forefathers and mothers. Today, we want to show you some tips on taking those dreams, those desires, those passions, and turning it into a product that you can put on the market and sell. My name is David Shabazz. My brother Julian Shabazz will come in and talk to you about the publishing aspect. I'm going to start it off by talking to you, well, come on in. I want to get us started with the writing process. Everything starts with the written product that you have. Without that, nothing is sellable. So, I believe everybody has a handout. I am, just to let you know, I'm a college professor. I teach mass communications at Kentucky State University. But I promise you, I will not lecture you the entire time. I will not take you back to school. I promise you that. I do want you to just review these few essential literary elements that will help make your story, whether it's a book, a novel, or a screenplay, into something that you can put on the market. We begin with the plot. The plot is the most important thing. Without the plot which generates your story, you have no story. And as many of you probably know, there are a lot of films out there today that are remakes. Where are our writers? Why do we have to remake G.I. Joe, Pelham 123, Manchurian Candidate, and so forth and so on, Star Trek, Star Wars, all of those remakes? Our writing is lacking. And that's where I think we really need to start. Everything starts with the plot. If you look down at the bottom of your page, Freytag's Pyramid, this strategy analyzes the basic structure of a story. Everything begins with your exposition. In the exposition, this is where, and I do have the explanations of everything on the back page of this. The exposition, this is where you introduce the characters and the setting and the plot. You just establish the story here. You must have an inciting incident to move the story along. Most inciting incidents happen to be tragedy, the death of someone, and that's what pushes the person to strive towards something. I personally don't think that every inciting incident has to be a tragedy. You could get married, and that takes you from being a single person into a new life. And that's what the inciting incident needs to do. It needs to close one door to push you on into the next. Then you have the rising action. This is where, okay, once this incident has happened, something pushes you to resolve it. So that's the rising action, and it builds up to your climax. In the climax, this is the most important, most exciting part of the story. After your climax, then everything sort of dies down, your falling action, and you have your resolution, which resolves the story. It, again, like the inciting incident, it has to be something that closes one chapter to take you into the next. Those are the key elements that a lot of people really miss. The denouement is something that sort of ties up all of the loose ends. And really in today's society, it kind of builds for a sequel. It sets the stage for you to go into something else. So they've kind of changed the real denouement now. I'm not going to bore you by going over everything that you can read. Characterization is probably another big point where people really miss. Characters are not developed. Even if your character, from what we tend to see with a lot of black literature today, is all street literature. If you want to write street literature, even if your person is in the hood, most people from the hood, well, nobody was born a thug. There was some circumstance that made you into that, and most of our families are not hood families and raised you to be that way. We don't take the time to explore the family background that gives life to the character. How did this person get this way? They're just a mean thug. Well, they didn't start off that way. Something happened, and you have to give life to that character and show how it became that way. The setting is pretty simple. That's the time and place of your incidents and all of the events. Foreshadowing, some little hint that keeps the readers or viewers interested, because it kind of hints to something that's going to happen. And again, we get a lot of this from Aristotle and Shakespeare. It tends to be an impending death that you know that's about to happen. I don't think everything has to be that way. I think we can come with a different perspective. And that brings us to the point of view. Point of view is probably the most important. All of these are important. But as far as the black community goes and what we need, I think our perspective, we need to start showing something different to our people so they can aspire for something. They don't see it. Ladies and gentlemen, this is fiction. It's all make-believe. Why can't we create a utopia for black people in our writing, if it's all fiction anyway? Why do we have to follow those traditional foreshadowing to, you can see the slow death just dragging out that's going to happen in the end? And I don't think we need to do that. We don't need to see any more of that. Figurative language, the last one. This is something that sort of gives beauty to the writing itself. When you use imagery and your comparisons, whether it's a simile or a metaphor, alliterations, personifications, onomatopoeia, hyperbole, and idioms. They all are very good. And with the language, I gave an example of language being used in a creative way. From the Star Wars character, Yoda says, "Much to learn you still have." Instead of the traditional subject, verb, and object, he starts it off with object, then the subject and the verb. So just a play on something that identifies that character. When you see him, you know who that person is. That's characterization. That's building a character, giving them a voice, a certain way they look, a certain way they walk, a certain way they talk. And we need to develop those with our characters. On the back page, back of the front page, for those of you who write, I do have the explanation here, and for your story, sort of a checklist for you to make sure that you are following Freytag's pyramid, to make sure you have all of those elements in your story. The next page, I have the writing process, and I'm certainly not going to go over all of this. I'm not going to insult you like that. You can read this on your own. But one thing that throws a lot of people off, and I see it all the time in my classrooms, we tend to get lazy. We want to write one time and be through with it. I'll take a seat. Instead of going back, doing it over, making a good, polished piece of writing, we just want to do it one time and be through with it. Spend some time in the pre-writing, the pre-planning, thinking about what you want to do, how you want it to go. From there, then you write it. Then you go back and the word that nobody likes, rewriting. Nobody likes to do that. Go rewrite. Go revise. Spend a little time with it, and you'll have something polished that, like George Lucas did with Star Wars, has been around since 1978. And putting out fresh runs because the scripts were that good. The characters were that good. That's why it's still around. So I think if we spend a little more time, and I do have some strategies for each of these areas for you to look at with your actual writing. I think that all of that's going to be of benefit for you. On the back page, I have some tips from some famous authors about writing, the writing process itself. Certainly you can't come here and not have something from Maya Angelou, who was one of the big interviews that I had. She was really instrumental in helping me. I used to be a reporter here for the Winston-Salem Chronicle before I moved to Kentucky. So I certainly had the pleasure of interviewing her a couple of times. She was a big influence on my actual writing. And I do have a guidebook that's coming out. It's going to be on my website, and I have that information there for you. I have a piece of it here. It's going to be a free download, which gives some more tips about the writing process and some things that you can do. So, with that said, I do think that that little voice that we hear urging us on, because I believe there's a story in each and every one of us. And that little voice that keeps pushing us to publish that story, we need to stop swatting it away like it's a gnat, because it's not going anywhere, and listen to it and follow it and put that great piece of work out there. At this point, I'm going to turn it over to my brother, and if there are any questions later on, I'll be glad to answer those. Does everybody have a copy of this?
Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon. I'm Julian Shabazz. That's my brother David, as he mentioned earlier. Before we started picking up a little weight and hair falling out, we used to look just like twins. But and that was what we used to present ourselves as, the twins of spin. You know, we started off in rap music, which was where our writing began, and that's where we presented ourselves as the twins of spin. You know, but looks a little different now. And just like he stated, he's working as a college professor in Kentucky. I'm teaching as a college professor in South Carolina at Benedict College in Columbia, South Carolina. So actually we're both working at HBCUs, historically black colleges. So to piggyback on what he says, we see it all the time. The great question Langston Hughes asked, what happens to that dream deferred? We see so many people with potential. We see so many people with talent. We see so many people with desires, with goals, with aspirations, that for some reason they just can't seem to do what is necessary to get it done. You know, just like you were saying, swatting that gnat, those voices in our head, those voices that say, you don't have enough time, don't have enough skill, don't have enough ability, I don't know the right people, I don't have enough contacts to be able to get done what it is that I desire. And we started as teenagers in the music industry, and then later moved over into the publishing industry as well. So the name of our company is Awesome Records, because we actually started with records. Anybody remember records? Okay. Yeah, we actually started with 45 RPM, revolutions per minute, you know? And we later moved into cassettes, and now we're into CDs and iTunes, MP3, you know, digital format now. So we've come a long way with the process. But having had that HBCU experience, one of the beautiful things about being black is that we are so culturally rich, and that there's so many things that we heard as kids growing up that didn't really click until later on, when they actually started to make sense to us then. We had been writing our whole lives. We just didn't know it. We had been creating our whole lives. We just didn't know it. And just like in the music industry, we created some of the greatest music you will ever hear, rap music, some of the greatest rap music you will ever hear. But you know what? No record company wanted to sign us. Could you believe no one wanted to give us multi-millions of dollars and just fly us around? Hey, go get it yourself. So that's what we ended up having to do. So we started our own company. And it was the same thing in the publishing industry. We noticed that we weren't the first to have been turned down and did it ourselves. So on the second handout you got the second handout, Publish You. The second handout you got, the first couple of pages in there give you samples. This came from John Crimmer's website. John Crimmer is the great author of the book 1001 Ways to Market Your Books. And he has a great website called bookmarket.com. And he published one of his great books called the Self-Publishing Hall of Fame. And all of that information is derived from the Self-Publishing Hall of Fame. As you'll notice, there were so many African Americans for years and years and years. We could probably pinpoint in this particular part of the world with Phyllis Wheatley. But even prior to, this part of the world and what we call in this particular style of writing, we are the architects of communication. We are the architects of literature as you look throughout history. But self-publishing, and what we always focus on, self-publishing traditionally carries a negative stigma. Am I right? Mm-hmm. The prevailing thought, if you were a self-published author, is that you really aren't good enough to be with a literary agent to get you signed with a major publishing house or even a minor publishing house. So there was a stigma even that you, talent-wise, weren't good enough, or your story, or your book, or whatever just wasn't something that the public would find interesting, or that a company could find marketable. Then there was another stigma attached to self-publishing, and that you would hear terms sometimes like subsidy publishers or vanity publishers. There were these companies that had a reputation of cheating writers, or overcharging them, if you will, to publish their books for them, and then charging them exorbitant amounts to buy copies of the books themselves, and that these companies weren't considered reputable or legitimate. Now, there really are some companies like that will charge you exorbitant amounts of money. But over the years, self-publishing has changed in terms of the stigmatization toward it. Because just when you look at those examples, so many people over the years have self-published. Now, I started off with some African-American self-publishers. The next couple of pages after that, I give you some white folks. Sometimes we need to see that white folks have done it as well. And that's no disrespect. We just need to see that sometimes. When you think about the elements of style being a self-published work, Robert's Rules of Order being a self-published work, and even today, one of the popular ministers out there now, Rick Warren, even self-published a book called The Purpose-Driven Church, and that led to The Purpose-Driven Life. In our community, the great T.D. Jakes. Religious books have always found the market. I'm going to come back to that in a moment, because there's a very good key that we can learn from churches in terms of marketing our products to our particular demographic. But if you'll flip over to page 10, I think, in your handout, I give you some examples of the technicality. And this was one part of the problem with self-publishing books, is that in some cases, the people who self-published their work didn't always follow a professional decorum. Sometimes the books were poorly put together, lacked editing and proofreading, even lacked some of the technicality of like barcodes, Library of Congress catalog numbers or cataloging and publication CIP, even the ISBN numbers, the EAN barcodes, so that it could be stocked in the actual bookstores. So if you are publishing a book that you want sold in bookstores, you have to generally follow the format that everyone else does, so that your book will look like everyone else's on the bookshelf. Makes sense, doesn't it? Unfortunately, sometimes, self-publishers just didn't know these things. Copywriting. Is copywriting important?
Yes.
Very. Creative people know. All we have to do is look back over the years, and we don't have to look that far. It's still happening today, where we see people who have created something, but for whatever reason did not have the protection of what they created, and now someone else lives good off of their creation. Copyright. Be sure to copyright everything you do. Everything you do. Everything you do. Be sure to do that. And there was even what was called the poor man's copyright years ago. Yes, sir.
I was going to ask you, I didn't mean to interrupt.
No, don't.
Is that everything that you do, like for each quote or each, I guess, phrase or whatever you're doing, for each of those, or just wait till you complete?
Completed projects primarily. There are some legality to phrases and titles. Have you noticed titles generally are not copyrightable? If that's the word, copyrightable.
Okay.
Have you ever noticed a book could have a certain title? A movie could have the same title? A song could have that same title? Sometimes with titles and phrases, there's a little bit of legality. But that doesn't mean across the board you can't copyright phrases.
Okay.
I like boxing. There's a great boxing announcer by the name of Michael Buffer who got famous with his opening phrase, "Let's get ready to rumble." He copyrighted that. He actually has a trademark even on that phrase. So I just said that. If he sees this anywhere, he might, send me a bill. But yeah, it's a very good question, because that's an example of someone who has at least trademarked that phrase, because he has become so identified with it that he just doesn't want everybody out there using that phrase without him getting some compensation.
Donald Trump was doing it, trying to "You're fired."
You're fired. Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. So yeah, you just need to be able to go and follow up with the legality of everything you're doing. Just don't put your work out there without any form of protection, because it's wide open. And believe me, there are people out there who will take your work and make money off of it, and they won't even mention your name. Anyone ever heard of Willie Mae Thornton? She called herself Big Mama. Years ago, she had a famous song called "You Ain't Nothing But a Hound Dog." Today's people don't know that. Never heard of Willie Mae Thornton. They think Elvis did. I saw a hand.
Yeah, I had a hand,
Yes.
because I'm in a writing workshop and it's a playwriting workshop. People come in, they can bring in their work and they read it, and people have come in. I've never said anything, but they bring in things that I've seen on TV as they're presenting it as their play.
Wow.
And you've seen that probably more than once.
Right? Yeah.
Again, our creativity, if we don't do everything we can to protect it and at least make it marketable for ourselves and our generations coming behind us after we pass away. See, someone can take our creation and their next 3 generations live off of your creation. Yes, you're thinking out loud.
Well, I am, because I was like, my thought was ideas are out there. And the reality is, it's going to sound really kind of harsh. The reality is you and I can have the same idea about a story. And it can be so similar, especially to sit and talk like, oh yeah, it's kind of the same thing. I had that happen here. But what happens is, sounds bad, sort of like returning, be the first one to log your stuff with the copy house, with the copyright, because at that point it comes back to, hey, well, I have a copyright on my stuff, and so if it goes to court, you have the stamp that says on this date it was submitted, versus, we get into this battle of, but we said, and I had the same idea, maybe you did, but here's my copyright on it.
You're right. You're right. Yes.
Now, how much trouble are you getting in with the copyright lawyers or whoever's doing this?
That's a good question. because every attorney, number one, is not proficient in copyright law, number one. Number two, the laws change almost daily. Number three, if I write a book on copyright right now and I put it in print next week, it's already obsolete, some of the information in there. I mean, that's just the reality. What number I'm on now? Number four, there's so many different ways people fudge things. And it's just who's on your team. Who do you have that's on your team that's proficient in these areas? Sometimes, and that's what, particularly in rap music, I've seen, so many people get into the entertainment industry without a clue about anything. They just want to get paid and hear their work. And before it's all over, someone else is lying on the beach with the fruits of their labor.
Gamble with the lawyer and yourself. You put it out there, you have to say you might get, you know.
If you use attorneys, some people don't use attorneys. You know, some people are just as detailed enough to go and do the research themselves, but be mindful that it changes all the time. So
Copyright is very easy. You can go online and there's a form you fill out and you mail in your work with that form that you printed from the internet, and your work is never protected.
and years ago, I'm sorry,
It's much easier than that because you can fill it out and submit it online
and
now.
submit it right now.
And it's cheaper if you submit it online, maybe $10 cheaper if you do it online now. So you don't have to get you do the research yourself, you cut out the middleman, which is the lawyer with the fees and all that good stuff. You do it yourself.
Do you remember Form TX?
Yes.
Some years ago, Form TX was the form for, particularly for literary works. Now they're using Form CO, which encompasses Form TX for literary as well as sound. What was it? SR we used to use when we did sound recording. Now Form CO, like you're talking about, that you can submit online, and I think I have that website in there. But yeah, so it just depends on what you're willing to do. But again, you don't want to just put your work out there, throw it out there, without any form of protection. You just don't want to take that kind of chance. I honestly believe that most people on this planet that there are more good people on this planet than bad. But the bad ones are really bad. And sometimes, even some of us good folks, if we're tempted, if it's right there, you know. That's another story for another time. Also, you see a copy on there of an image of an EAN barcode, right? That's actually the EAN barcode from my latest book, which is, what we base this workshop around, how to be a player in the publishing industry, which is my latest book. If you notice on there, you will see one set of those numbers refers to the ISBN number, International Standard Book Number. And ISBN numbers, there is a fee associated with ISBN. In fact, I think they sell you blocks. You can purchase, blocks of 10 or blocks of 100 or blocks. They sell those in blocks. There is a fee associated, and like we mentioned earlier, there is a fee associated with copywriting, the copyright forms, as well as there is a fee with the International Standard Book Number. With magazines, you see the ISSN, International Standard Serial Number. And also another number, you see a little number off to the side that generally refers to whatever the price of your product is. So you'll see that general code number 5, and then you'll see like 10, whatever. That tells you my book sells for $10. And some places like retail stores many times would use the UPC code, which was a different code, but retailers primarily utilize that. Whereas your book folks look for your ISBN numbers. Then there's also the issue of cataloging and publication. And I didn't list CIP, cataloging and publication, in this because primarily with self-publishers, they are referred to using the LCCN number. which stands for Library of Congress Control Number.